Hello, everyone. Nice seeing you again. In this episode of Till Death Do You Plan, our widowed guest, Kim Murray, shares how two important elements of her and her husband's end of life plan really saved her when her husband was dying of brain cancer. She also shares the heart wrenching story of when they had to inform their kids that he was not going to survive. Would you know what to say if you found yourself in that circumstance? These are really tough things to consider, but we hope that you will stick with it, that you will learn from her experience, and that you will update your own plans so that you and your family are prepared. Enjoy the video, and please don't forget to like and share if you find it helpful. Thank you. Welcome, and thank you for taking some time to talk to us today.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.
Yeah, so let's jump right into it. First, let's just kind of go back and have you tell us about you and Mark. How did you meet? What kind of life were you living before his diagnosis?
We had a perfect life. I know there's no such thing, but we had as close to perfect as you can get. So that's what makes it, all the more sad. We had two small children. We'd been married for 12 years, but prior to that, we met at a social networking group. So we were on a dart league together. So we met doing that. And then we were married for maybe a year, started having our family, and just went gangbusters with, our kids and growing our family. And then
what were your careers? Like what were you doing for work?
He owned his own business. So he owned a business selling chemicals to the metal processing industry in Detroit. I worked prior to having kids, but when we started our family, I just quit working to stay home with them. So I wasn't working at the time. But after he got sick, I had to kind of jump in. But prior to that, he was just, he was self-employed and coached little league teams, and I volunteered at the school, and we had dinner at 5:30 every night as a family. I mean, all the good things, right?
The white picket fence,
the dog, the whole picture. So yeah, I mean, it was really we were blindsided by his diagnosis for sure.
Did you both have family in the area?
His family, his mom, he was an only child, so his mom and dad were close by. They're like 20 minutes away. And my mom at the time, she's been gone for several years. She died, but she was around for a while. My dad was in a different state, so we had some family around.
Good. Yeah.
Mostly his parents. Yeah.
And where is this that you're living?
I live in Michigan.
Michigan.
Yep, Detroit suburbs. Yeah.
Okay, great. So you're living the perfect family life, and all of a sudden, Mark started to have some really sort of bizarre motor skill memory issues. So tell us about that.
Yeah, like I said, he owned his own business, and so I wasn't aware of the signs prior to his diagnosis. Of course, we can go back in time and say, why didn't I know? Mm-hmm. Why didn't I see this 6 months prior? But I didn't, because we were busy. We had a small family. We were, super busy. But he just had some memory issues, and he had trouble getting to a customer's location. And he had his business for 25 years. So to not remember how to drive to a customer's location was weird. But he was 10 years older than I was. So I thought that I maybe was in the beginning of like an Alzheimer's patient diagnosis situation. I mean, I really didn't know. I thought this is weird, but whatever. And he was working a lot. Maybe he was tired, that kind of thing. Yeah. You blow everything off. You've got rationalizations for all of it. Yeah. You guys know what I'm talking about. So that was, we just kept going on. But he started saying just weird things. I can't explain it, just like weird words describing things that didn't make sense. But the key was on Valentine's Day of that year. That was in 2013. He tried to write a card to me, and he couldn't write my name. So it looked like squiggly lines on the card. So when the kids got on the bus that morning, he said something's terribly wrong. And he showed me the card. And I was like, okay, now I'm paying attention. Like, this is like not normal. Went to the hospital. Actually went to his doctor, a family doctor first, and he says, you need to go to emergency. So we did. They thought maybe he had meningitis. Why? I don't know what the symptoms of meningitis are. He looked terrible, whatever. So they sent us to the emergency room, and they did a CAT scan and saw a mass in his brain. And the neurosurgeon on call that night said, you have glioblastoma. You have 12 to 15 months to live. Please treat it, each day going forward as a gift. So we went in thinking he had meningitis or maybe the flu. We didn't really know. And he'd kind of been under the weather the previous days before that, but it could be anything. Yeah. Anything. So when they said that I'd never heard of glioblastoma. Now I hear it all the time, but I'd never heard of it prior to that. So I was like, what does this mean? I don't understand. And it was terminal. So I don't know. How do you deal with that, like that information when someone tells you you're going to die?
I think it's so interesting how, we're so afraid of, our person dying, but I think diagnosis is the worst of it. Mm-hmm. Death is almost, that's the relief part because, you've been thinking about this for however long,
right?
And you've been grieving it the whole time, but
right.
It's the diagnosis. That's the day that you're like, and now it's before and after.
Well, it's always, and I always always explain it as the day his countdown to death started. So I looked at it as now we're counting down to when he dies, which is absurd. When you live that way, that this is, I mean, so we didn't understand the diagnosis. We understood that the doctor said, you will not survive this. But he went through all the chemo and the radiation and the treatments. They did surgery. They can take the tumor out, but it always grows back. That's why it's terminal with glioblastoma. There's no cure. So we did all the things. He did all the things, clinical trials and whatever else, just to extend that time. Yeah. But we knew that was, that day was coming.
And how old were your kids again?
They were 8 and 10 when he was diagnosed, and 9/11 when he died. Yeah. So he died within a year of his diagnosis.
Yeah. So tell us about that initial conversation of telling the kids that dad was sick. How much did you tell them?
Yeah. So again, they were 8 and 10. So we told them that he had cancer. We told him he had a brain tumor. We told him all the things except for the death part. So as adults, especially for me, that was a pretty heavy burden to carry.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how my 8 and 10-year-old children were supposed to carry that too. So I just didn't want to tell them too far in advance. How far is too far? I have no idea, but too far in advance. So we were honest with them about everything up until that point. So they knew all about the doctor's appointments and everything that was going on. However, that was in January. He was diagnosed in February, like around December, second half of the year, nearing December, his personality started changing. And I don't know if you know anybody who's dealt with somebody with glioblastoma, but they can be very aggressive. So it's almost like I explain it like their tumor shifts sometimes, because sometimes they're clear and coherent, and sometimes they stare off into space like they're not even there, or they're speaking weirdly or aggressively. That started happening. So I was like, we have to tell them. This is getting to the point where I can't keep dancing around it any longer.
Do you think that, 8 and 10-year-olds, their kids are smarter and smarter these days.
Super smart. They're super smart.
Do you think, and maybe you've talked to them since then, but do you think they went to the internet and started researching all of this to get an idea of what really was happening?
I don't think so. I really don't. My 8-year-old for sure was not. If my 10-year-old was, I don't think he was. However, he was smart enough to know that he would say to me, Mom, if the doctors aren't fixing this problem, then you need to find a new doctor. So we would say he still has the tumor. So we know the end, but he doesn't. So he's like, well, this is dumb.
Yeah.
If it's not getting fixed, then you need to find somebody who's going to fix it. So those kind of questions too. And so I kind of knew he was inching toward that point also with the questions he was asking. So I had and in one of Mark's more coherent times, I had said, we need to have this discussion with the kids. So I actually went to a grief counselor because I wanted to know, how do you tell your kids that their parent's going to die? I don't know how to do that. So she was very clear with me.
Sorry. Did Mark resist at all that idea of telling them?
Nope, he didn't resist. I was taking all this on, like, he's dying. So you have nothing left to do here. I will handle everything else. So I went to the grief counselor and she said, just be honest, use real words. Don't just tell them that your dad is sick and that he won't recover because he's sick, because then if they get sick, they'll think they're going to die. So those kinds of things you don't really think about in your brain. You're trying to protect your kids and make it a little bit more palatable for them. But the grief counselor was very specific. You need to tell them he's going to die. Well, I still didn't know how to do that, but I went to a couple of sessions with her and I practiced what I was going to say. Like I practiced what I was going to say. And when we actually ended up sitting down talking to the boys that day, I couldn't say it. Mm-hmm. So Mark ended up saying it. Wow. So all the things I'm trying to protect him from and protect my kids from, and all these things, responsibilities, I couldn't do it. So we said, your dad's not going to recover from this cancer. And so my 10-year-old, very inquisitive, what does that mean? And I would say something else. Well, what does that mean? And then you would say something else. And so when it got to the point where I had to say, it means he's going to die, I couldn't say it. So Mark did. And then, all hell broke loose. So it was awful. The screams and the wails and everything from their little voices. And my 10-year-old was looking at me specifically as if to determine, is what he's saying true? Like our eyes were connected. You know what I'm saying? He's looking straight at me and I was like shaking my head that, what he said is true. So that was about a month, 6 weeks before he died.
Mm-hmm. In hindsight, do you wish that you had talked to them sooner, or do you feel like the timing was about right?
You know how guilt works? It's like a sneaky bitch, right? Like, so I had a lot of guilt for a while about that. But honestly, my honest answer is no, I would not have done it any differently. I wouldn't have. It was so horrific and such a horrible thing to have to endure, that countdown to death. I do not think telling them sooner would have been beneficial in any way. I really don't.
Yeah.
And psychiatrists and psychologists can, tell me differently. That's fine. But this is what I felt was right for our family. So after that, then they started to understand. The reason I told Mark, in December, I'm like, we need to tell them because his personality was changing. He was lashing out at the kids. He might be more aggressive, more angry, more yelling more. And I didn't want them to think that they were doing anything wrong or start to resent their father who was dying and they didn't know he was dying. So once that all came out, the personality changes they were not taking as personally. And we talked about that. We did, again, they were young. We did the whole writing back and forth to each other in journals and, they're boys. So they weren't really completely forthcoming with their thoughts and feelings, but we would, kind of write in journals and they could ask me questions and I'd answer, I'd take it to the doctor or whatever. So they had time to sort of process it. If a month or 6 weeks is enough, there is no right time to process. So I wouldn't do it differently. He did end up falling down the stairs though in January of that next year. And that was what actually was the beginning of the end for him. So he did fall down the stairs and he had a subacute subdural hematoma, which under normal circumstances, as bad as it was, people don't typically survive. And we already knew he was not, didn't have much time left. So that kind of fast forwarded things in the beginning of 2014. And then he died in February.
Okay. Well, I want to get to that because there's a part of that process that I kind of want to focus on, but I want to go back to the kids for just a little bit longer, if that's okay.
Sure.
Up to that point, before the diagnosis, had your kids been exposed to death in any way, like grandparents or family members or friends or parents of friends?
My mom died.
Like
so my mom died, but they were 3 and 5 at the time.
3 and 5. Okay.
So they don't really remember much about that. And she had a memorial. There was no casket or anything like that. So she died. And my 3-year-old doesn't remember anything. My 5-year-old remembers some, but it wasn't a super close, they saw her every day kind of relationship.
Yeah. Pets?
So that was
pets or anything?
No pets, but we had a pet. And so the year that Mark died, that he died in February, we had to put our dog down in October that same year. So that was a rough one too. She was 13, which was for a dachshund was, pretty good life, but she started having seizures and the vet said, we think she might have a brain tumor and we can do x-rays. And I was like, no, I can't do this again. No. Not, we just have to figure out what our next steps are. I gave her some medicine, but we had to put her down. So no pets before that. No, nothing major.
Okay. Yeah. I just, this whole talking to kids about death, especially if it's a death of a parent, is a kind of a fascinating thing for me and something I always wonder about because Katie and I both had kids, but they were all older when our spouses passed away. And so I think in my head anyway, it's a very different conversation when the kids are older and more mature than when they're younger. And so
we had totally different experiences with how we talked about it with our kids.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, there's a number of families out there that are going to have to deal with this. And so it's always, we wrote a blog about this once and I did some research on, what's the prevailing consensus of how to talk to kids. And it was just as you described, it's, don't mince words, use death and dying and, don't say they're just, out of town for a while or sleeping forever or, you use the right words. And so, I was glad to hear that was the counsel that you got. And even though it maybe didn't go the way that, you wanted it to, your husband was still aware enough where, he said, essentially put it out there,
this is what's going to happen.
Words. Yeah.
And I think that, for anybody listening, if they're going through this or know somebody nobody can really tell you what to do for your family. I mean, they really can't.
Nope.
So again, like I said, I wouldn't do things differently. Some people think that's probably wrong. I don't really care, but that would be a perception of something they don't really know anything about. So you really have to focus on your family and what you think your kids are capable of handling or the maturity of their ages and whatnot. Because after we told them, my oldest, which I had a feeling was going to happen, which is why I don't want to tell them earlier, would ask me constantly, do you think he's going to make it to this day? Do you think he's going to make it to Christmas? His birthday was the day after Christmas. Do you think he's going to see his birthday? What about New Year's Eve? What about New Year's Day? So it was can you imagine 12 months of that?
Oh, no.
No. So it was just, when is it going to happen? I said, I don't know. And that's the worst part, right? Because you don't know. Mm-hmm. We know it's coming. We don't know when. And so it was just a lot of anxiety about when that was going to happen. Would he see the baseball game? Mom, is he going to make it to my playoffs? I don't know.
Do you feel like once you told them that they made more of an effort to try and connect with him while he was still
Absolutely.
around? Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And I know my older son at 10, it's a really kind of an interesting age because he kind of knows what's going on. He's not as young as the 8-year-old. I don't know whether like you flip a switch or something, but he knew that that time was of the essence. But he also went through a little bit of a phase of being angry with me for not telling him sooner. But I'm the adult. I make the decisions based on what's best for our family. So, I did the best I could with the information I had at the time. So there was a little bit of that, which I understood. And I said, that's fine. You're entitled to your feelings, but I'm the one that makes the decisions and make sure that, the family's good.
For what
Was
it's
that-
worth, I think you did it brilliantly.
Thank you.
Genius. I mean, first of all, going to a grief counselor, I mean, having the presence of mind to do that, I think is so smart. And knowing your children and, knowing that this is the bandwidth that I have, and this is the bandwidth that they have. And like I said, for what it's worth, well done, you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I do. And, looking back, hindsight's 2020, I would agree that it was the right thing to do. But at the time, carrying all that weight of sick husband, children, I took over running his business. I'm trying to figure all that stuff out too. It was a little bit crazy, but I just wanted to do things the right way. I'm like that type A perfectionist. It has to be done what's the right way? Give me the rules, give me the list. I'll check off the boxes. So the grief counselor made sense to me, but it didn't quite turn out the way I thought it would. What actually does?
What would have, I mean, there's no way it could have turned out the way you wanted, whatever that was.
No,
there's no way.
No.
I'm wondering if your oldest got protective of your younger son at all.
Not so much. Actually, my younger son's always been very like happy-go-lucky and everything's great. And actually I think it was in the first year after Mark died. So he was 8 when he was diagnosed, 9 when he died. He would, sit at the dinner table and say, I just love my life. And you're like, great. But how is that possible? So in his mind, how do you know what's going on in an 8-year-old's mind? I mean, he was happy with whatever he was happy with. Not that his dad was gone, but you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense? Like it was. So yeah, I just think he was always kind of like, now as he got older, they're older now. And as adults, we kind of have to have a relationship with that grief. Mm-hmm. We don't get to just bypass it anymore. So at some point, he needs to have feel those feelings that maybe he wasn't feeling back then, but he was just so young. He was so young.
All right. So he falls down the stairs, and that, as you mentioned, is kind of the beginning of the end. So he goes to the hospital, and then eventually he gets into hospice, but there was kind of a story of how that happened. Share that with us.
Well, I'm going to share it with you because it has to do with his advanced directives. So we'll go right into that part. Okay.
Yes.
So we had advanced directives, and we had our estate plan done when the kids were like 1 and 3. So we were taking a trip to New York, I think, and flying on a plane, booga booga. So if the plane goes down, what happens to our kids? So we had all that planned before we left. And at the time, figuring out what we're going to do with our advanced directives, I'm not thinking about nothing. He's not thinking I don't think I want to be kept alive by artificial means. Me either. So you just check the box. Right. So when he fell down, so technically, let's just be technical about this. When he fell down the stairs and had this, acute subdural hematoma, I should not have allowed them to do surgery on him because we knew that what was coming for him, right? So it happened so fast, and the doctors came out and said, we need to do a craniotomy. That's what it's called when they take half your skull off because of the pressure and whatnot. So I'm like, okay, do it. And so they did. And then he was in ICU for a week or so. And the back of my mind, I know this is not good. This is like not, but I'm still keeping him in the hospital. And he was in the hospital for a couple of weeks. And then he got out of ICU. They still had him on all the tubes to eat and swallow and all that and go to the bathroom and all of that. And he couldn't speak and he really couldn't swallow, but he could kind of grunt. So you'd ask him a question and he might grunt something, but I don't know if that's a yes or a no.
Yeah.
I don't know if you understand. So, cause he fell pretty hard. So there was no way to do any diagnosis or diagnostics on his mental capacity. He had a brain tumor. It was like, that wasn't happening. So in the hospital, he was getting agitated, trying to pull stuff out of his arms and pull his tubes out and whatever. And so one day I was sitting with him at the hospital. I said, I'm doing the best I can. And he banged his head on the bed And then he pointed at me and he did like a no sign with his hand. He just like, I'm done, is the way I took it. Because you know your husband, you know whatever. And I was like, holy crap. I think he's like, this is his communication with me. So that night, literally that night, I went home and yanked the advanced directives out of our safe. And I reviewed it. And it said, you have to make decisions for him if he's not capable of making decisions, whatever the terminology is in there. So I probably read it 25 times that night. And I was like, I was kind of waiting, I think, for the hospital personnel to tell me what to do, the doctors and nurses. And they were not about to do any of that, because I'd ask
That's
him
not
questions.
their job, right? Their job is to keep him alive.
Yep, to keep him alive. And they know what his prognosis is. They know all of it. And nobody would tell me, is it time to call hospice? Is it time? I was waiting for some confirmation. Well, nobody's going to do that. So when I went home that night to check the advanced directives, I read it, like the terminology in the page. And I was like, this is my job. This is what he wanted. I cannot leave that man tied up to tubes any longer. And so the next day I went back in the hospital. And I said, we need to take him home with hospice, because nobody else would help me make that decision. I had to make myself. But I will say there was one nurse, because I ask a lot of questions. I just need to have some confirmation. That's really all I'm asking for, right? This is a huge thing, a big deal. And so one of the nurses kind of took me off to the side. And if you take feeding tubes out of somebody, they're no longer getting nourished, right? So how do you wrap your head around taking a feeding tube away from someone? And so she took me out to the side and she said, you're not feeding him, you're feeding the tumor.
That's right.
He's dying. So all you're doing is keeping the tumor alive. And I was like, that's all I needed to know. Like, really, that was all. So I was like, that makes sense to me. Okay, I understand that. Intellectually, you understand everything, but emotionally, you can't wrap your head around it. So I told his parents, I'm taking them home with hospice. Well, the first question his dad asked was, does that mean you're starving him? And so I told him what the nurse said to me, and they understood it too. And I was like, no, he's not. This is not him anymore. Yeah. He is dying. And so I took him home. So when we got home, we set up the basement, hospital bed, and all that stuff. So after he fell, he was paralyzed on one side. So one side of his face was paralyzed and the other was not. But as soon as we got him home, got him up in the hospital bed, and I have a picture of it, he was smiling with the side of his face that wasn't paralyzed. So I knew we did the right thing. I knew he wanted to be home. And in the hospital, that pointing at me, whether he was pointing or not, I don't know, but it looked like he was pointing at me, was his message. I'm done here. We need to get this. You need to get me out of here.
After he was first diagnosed, did you review the advanced directive with him at all?
We never went over that. I knew they were in the file cabinet. I knew they were there. So I was, comforted by the fact that they were there, but it never dawned on me to go look at them or to see what was in it. Only after the debacle in the hospital, after he fell and stuff, I'm like, I need to know exactly what this says. I knew he wanted to be, you have the conversations with your husband about not being kept alive by artificial means. What does that mean though? When you have the conversation in your living room over a glass of wine, you're not thinking about, did he fall down the stairs and have an acute subdural hematoma? Well, what does that mean? There's no asterisk about acute subdural hematoma. So I knew it, but I didn't know exactly what it meant until I read the document 25 times.
Yeah. I think the important thing though is the fact that he made that decision.
Yes, he did.
So you didn't have to guess what he wanted.
You're exactly right.
It's such an impossible situation to be in. And even if you do the right thing, someone's going to question you.
Of course.
So the fact that he had the presence of mind and made the decision when he was healthy, you're like, that's what he wanted.
You're right.
You don't have to feel guilty about it the rest of your life.
No, and this is why it's so important to have those documents, right? And you're right. So that's really what I had to tell myself. Because I don't want to make the decision. We had to make the decision to take my mom off of life support 5 years prior to that. I don't want to make that decision ever again. Mm-hmm. I do not want to be responsible for that ever again. Well, I had to convince myself, to your point, it was not my decision. I am his advocate. I'm taking his wishes to the hospital and, the nurses and doctors and saying, let's bring him home. So you're right. It was not my decision. I was just helping him, get to that point.
I know that most advanced directives now, and I don't know what it was when you first filled yours out, but most of them now, there are questions that go beyond just, do you want to be fed by a feeding tube? It's more about, what are your values and what's important to you? And it kind of gives a much bigger picture so that, to your point, not every specific scenario that could ever come up is going to be covered in an advance directive. But if you have some generalities about under what conditions do you want a feeding tube and under what conditions do you don't, then it makes it a lot easier to interpret, what they've put in their advance directive in their particular, whatever their situation is. So,
well, a case in point, is it terminal or isn't it?
Right.
If it's terminal, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
Regardless of what happens in between.
Yeah.
So that's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think, Katie's husband, Dave, had his experience was, it was terminal, but they also offered him some options about, well, are they what's the word?
When they diagnosed him, I mean, they just said, well, he's got 6 to 8 weeks because it was pancreatic cancer. He has 6 to 8 weeks if you do nothing, and 7 to 9 months if you do treatment.
Yeah.
And he was like, I'll take the time. And of course, that's what you would do. And he was absolutely certain that he was going to be the 1%.
Of course.
He was a triathlete. He never smoked. He never drank. He was like the healthiest, joyfulest, most joyful person. So, I mean, he was certain. So, so fortunately, because we had that time, because we had not talked about that before, that's the only thing that I can think of, when they say, is it better to be, hit in a car wreck and done, or you have the time.
Right.
And, I obviously have mixed feelings about that now, but I'm grateful that he took the time, because then we did take the time to say, okay, what's happening?
Yeah.
And what do you need me to do? What do you want? All of the things.
Right.
And I am not a person that is afraid of confrontation or uncomfortable conversations, as Corey will tell you. But so I was like, let's talk about you dying. Like, what do you want? Blah, 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 blah. Most people are not interested in that at all. So in any case, I'm grateful that he took the time for that reason. But that's the only reason, because watching him deteriorate was traumatic.
It's awful. Yeah, it's really, there's no words. I mean, there's just really no words.
No, but it is, it is part of life though. We're all dying.
Well, it is part of life. And honestly, after we got him home with hospice, he was only home for 4 days before he died, but it was an extremely peaceful passing.
Yeah.
So I tell my kids all the time, like, you were part of something kind of incredible.
Yeah.
Because we were with him. He knew we were with him, and he passed very peacefully. What more can you ask for at that point? I mean, so I always look at it as that part as a positive, because it could have been him falling down the stairs and never recovering.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Right. So, I try to kind of give my kids that perspective too, that not everybody gets to hold their dad's hand and be with him when that happens.
So he passes away, and now you are suddenly a single mom and trying to run your household by yourself, and you take over his business. Excuse me. You mentioned before that you had this plane trip many years ago and you kind of got your affairs in order. So from a financial standpoint, can you talk about like, what were some of the decisions you made however many years before that was that really helped you financially kind of get through this point?
Yeah, well, we had life insurance. Hi, if you don't, just run out and get it today. Like, go.
Right. Yeah.
Turn the podcast off and go. Right? Like, this is not even up for discussion. I love those commercials that say, well, we can't afford insurance. Well, you can't afford not to have it. So we already know all that. So, but of course, like in my mind, I'm like, I should have had some more than what we actually had. But whatever. Can't think about that. So
no widow ever said I had too much life insurance.
I had too much ever. Because again, when you're having those conversations, and we had the conversation about how much we would take a policy out for, I'm like, well, if in passing, well, if anything happens to you, I'll just go back to work. You have no idea what that means when you have small children. Like, I'll just go back to work. Okay. But it's exponentially harder to do that and then try to, care for your family. So he had an established business. I took over running it while he was sick, so he could help me, teach me parts of it. We had different styles of doing things, so I had to kind of rearrange it to where I would understand it, especially he did everything by paper. I did everything electronically, so I had to put everything electronically into the system for invoices and whatever else. So I did all that while he was alive. But then when he died, my thought was, you don't tell a dying man no. I'm just going to throw that out there. So whatever he wanted me to do, I did. But I thought, after he dies, I'm just going to go do what I do. Like, I'll go back and find a job doing what I know how to do. But it was a flexible arrangement. He was self-employed. He had a handful of customers. I could come and go as I pleased. And so I thought, well, I can't do that if I get like a corporate job somewhere or go back to work full time. So I just said, okay, this is the way it's going to be for a while. I don't know how long, but it was technically part-time. And then I could just be home for my kids when I needed to be, when they got off the bus, when they had games for sporting events, when they needed to be dropped off at their friend's house. It was me. It wasn't a babysitter. It wasn't grandma and grandpa. It was me. So I kept that job. I did that job for 8 years after he died until I sold it when they were, 17 and 16 and 18 and pretty close to adulthood. But it was just a flexible arrangement for me. That's all. I didn't love it. Didn't want to do it. Hated it. Sorry, customers, if you're listening. They were wonderful people, but the job itself, love you, but the job itself was like, I'm not a chemist. Never said I was, never want to be. And I don't like sales. So there you go. But I just did what I had to do. So of course we had survivor benefits, children's survivor benefits through Social Security, which is huge too. So I wasn't worried about the financial part of it, because if that had been part of my experience, God help all of us. Because I'm a worst case scenario thinker. So I worry a lot about everything. So if I had that aspect to worry about, I'm not even sure how we would have gotten through it.
Did you take over the business because you felt like you needed that income to sustain yourself, or was it really more about just sort of fulfilling his legacy?
Fulfilling his legacy.
Yeah.
And guilt on my part too. Like, how do you, like, after he died, he was still alive in my mind, because I had his job. I had his customers. I drove the same routes he went every day. I saw notes on my desk that were written in his handwriting, file cabinets full of his, documents. So it sort of kind of still kept him alive a little bit in my mind.
Yeah.
And we talked about him all the time when I would go to see his customers. So they didn't know me prior to him dying other than what he told them about me. So here I come walking through the door, I'm taking over now. And I give them a ton of credit for sticking with me, to be honest with you, because they could have told me to pound sand, like, we're not dealing with you. Bye-bye now, but we love Mark, but bye-bye. And they didn't. So I really appreciate the way that all played out. But I did feel like I owed it to him. He started a business. Like, how do you just let that go?
Yeah.
How do you just drop that and let it go? So it took me 8 years to come to the conclusion that it wasn't my responsibility to continue that forever and ever. So it took me a very long time to get to the point where I could say, I've done the best I can do with this. And it wasn't something that my kids were going to take over. Right. We had discussed, potential of that, but it is industrial chemicals, and they cannot tell you how glioblastoma develops, but I can't believe that working with industrial chemicals didn't have something to do with it. Maybe a little bit. They can't tell you. So I was like, it's a dirty job, but it's like anything else with our society and our business structure now. A lot of the mom and pop shops are getting either bought up by bigger companies or just run out of the market altogether. So I could see that coming. I don't think it was a sustainable business even for my kids to inherit. So
from a legal standpoint, was there any trouble or specific challenges that you had in taking over the business, like legally, like with your name on?
No, I went to our I think it was the CPA, either the CPA or the estate attorney. Both of them were wonderful women who helped me. Like, I couldn't have done anything without their help. But just went to them and said, what do I do? And so they gave me the checklist that I needed and the instructions that I needed to just change the name. And everything was very simple. So I want to say this too, as far as having the estate plan, which you guys know, obviously, and the, life insurance and all that jazz, to not have to go through probate and to not have to deal with courts is everything. So the process for me was about as simple as it gets, because we had all of that done and all of our I's dotted and T's crossed. So I hear horror stories all the time from people who have just terrible experiences with the court, with probate. And I'm like, well, everything was written out for us. Like, everything was already done. So it was, cash the check, close this. I had death certificate here, and here, consolidated accounts. I'm not saying that was easy. I'm not trying to make, be flippant about it. None of that was easy, but it wasn't, it wasn't dragged through the court system.
I mean, you still have to make decisions, and you still had to go to the bank or whatever.
Right. And do all those things. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, that's just functional as opposed to bringing more emotional trauma to the already difficult situation. And the one thing that, maybe this, Corey, did you have any other questions about legal stuff? Because like the mental, emotional, spiritual.
Yeah, we'll get there in a second, but I did want to ask, so when he set up the business, were you listed as like a co-owner, or did he have some paperwork that said if something happens to me, then Kim takes over?
I think that he had an S corp. I'm not sure if that was part of the S corp, but I think it really is just basically I'm in Michigan was just a state deal, like as a husband wife. There was nothing that was preventing us from doing that. It was just a very simple process for that. I wasn't a co-owner or anything. And when even before he got sick, he would ask me to help him with the business. I'd be like, I'm not doing that. I mean, you got your paper accounting. I'm not getting my hands on that paper account. So I felt bad after he got diagnosed. Like if I'd have done what he asked me to several years prior, that transition would have been as difficult. It's not how it happened. So whatever.
Yeah.
But no, we didn't have any issues with changing it to my name at all.
Okay.
And there were no problems selling it.
No, actually, no, there were no problem selling it. So one of the customers who had worked with Mark pretty intensively, it was kind of a mutually beneficial relationship. We sold some of their products, they sold some of ours.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the end of wanting to do this anymore, I just kind of asked him, what do you think about this? And it was, again, I've had divine support since my husband died. I'm just going to throw that out there. Okay. So all these processes were pretty simple for me. So what I was so afraid of happening, like nobody's going to buy the business. What am I going to do? I can't just walk away, was not the case at all. This customer said, we'd love to buy it. We wrote up some paperwork. I handed it to my attorney, handed it to his, and it was done. So it was very simple. Probably it sounds like, well, it must be nice, Kim. It was so simple for you. It was a very easy process, but it took me 8 years to get there.
Yeah.
That part wasn't easy.
Yeah.
But you had done some things previous to that allowed you to do that. You had the life insurance policy. You had the advanced directive that often, that provided a peaceful passing, and you didn't have a lot of that emotional anger. And maybe Katie, that's what you were going to get at a minute ago, but that's important. And people can say, yeah, you had it easy, but you had it easier because you did some things prior to his passing that made it that way.
Well, you know what? I think it was, I don't know, one of the Stoics, I'm going to say Seneca, I'm not for sure, but said luck is where preparation meets opportunity. Mm-hmm. People say that all the time to me about, oh my gosh, you're so lucky. You have no idea the amount of preparation I go to in my life, just in general. So yeah, I'm not lucky. I prepare for my luck, but it does take some work that other people don't really know what's going on, I mean,
you pay on one end or the other.
Right.
So you pay either way.
True.
So it's just a matter of, do you want to have the hassle up front or the hassle on the other end when you are in la la land?
No, I prepare. I'm prepared for everything. People joke about I'm overinsured. I'm this, I'm that. I'm like, no, I'm not overinsured. I have everything I need. I bought disability insurance when I took over on the business. My husband got cancer. What if I get cancer?
Right.
I mean, why wouldn't
underage kids? You gotta.
I'm supporting people. Why wouldn't I have disability insurance? To me, that doesn't, so yeah, I had all the insurance. Yeah. All of it, an extra. Yeah. Umbrella policy, whatever, give it to me.
Right.
I'll take it. I don't want to deal with anything.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know that people understand too. And, our whole thing is about preparing, but there are things you cannot prepare for, like, telling your children,
right?
Things like that. And I think when you have a loss like that, particularly, and I don't know any different other than having been a caretaker.
Yeah.
But I was so, after he died, my brain was done. Mm-hmm. And now I have to make legal and financial. Mm-hmm. What are you talking about? I don't know what day it is. I don't know where other clothes are that I've been in the same thing for 4 days. Like, I don't even know. So the fact that you had those things already taken care of gave you the ability to experience grief and fog in a healthy way without having to put it aside, because I got to deal with A, B, and C because we didn't do it before.
Yeah.
And now I've got all these layers of trauma because I don't know what's happening, and I am in charge of everything now. And you're so smart.
Well, just prepared. Like you said, it's preparation. And I've been telling my friends ever since Mark died, like, get your affairs in order, get your affairs, prepare your affairs. And we know. And I'm like, dummies. I mean, come on now. Like, come on. You've seen it. And it's shocking to me how people who have seen it will still say, well, I know, we got to get to that. What are you waiting for? My God, get it done. It's like insane to me because you've lived it. I've lived it. We know what that feels like. But again, you don't understand things that you haven't lived through. So other people don't know how emotionally, devastating that can be, and mentally devastating when you're trying to make decisions and you don't know what to do.
Well, we're not great about talking about death in this country in the first place.
Yeah.
So it is easy for us to be like, I'll get to it.
Yeah.
I mean, we have friends that are widows that have not
Yeah.
got their shits together.
Yeah.
I'm like, what? You want your
You already
kids to
know.
deal with what you just dealt with? Because
Yeah.
that's who you're passing it on to.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well,
All right.
well done for all of that
Yes.
preparation.
Yeah.
And so you run the business, you eventually sell the business. Life is moving forward as it does. And how, just talk about just kind of emotionally, mentally, even though you were well prepared, like where, in the next few years, how did your emotions and mental state of mind sort of evolve?
Well, it was really bad in the beginning. I did like everybody else does, or like most people do. I avoided the grief. I thought I was the one that could outrun the grief. Like nobody else could do it, but I could. I mean, I don't need to deal with this. I can just keep going. And then I won't have to, worry about it. So we traveled a lot in the first 2 years. I was dragging my kids all over the country. I mean, we did a lot of traveling. And it caught up with me as it does, like it does for anybody. You can't outrun grief. And so after about, I'm not kidding, like 2 years of lots of travel, because we traveled around the country, but I also took them all over Michigan. I don't care. You want to go to Port Huron, 2 hours away? Let's get in the car and go. Whatever it took, get me out of the house, we'll go. So after a while, I got exhausted, like physically and mentally and emotionally and all that stuff. And I was just really, really angry, very, very angry, like is typical. But I'd gone to, and I say that was for 2 years, but I don't really think I made peace with my grief for probably a good 4 or 5 years after he died. They say you have to feel it.
Was your anger towards Mark or God or just life in general, or
just life in general? I was 44 when he died. It's like, come on, man. I mean, really, like, now what? I mean, you have this whole idea of how things are going to be. And I didn't get married until I was 31. So I was on the, older end of my friends and all that. So it took me a while to find him. And when I found him, and then we were together for 12 years and he died. So it was just like angry about that. Just, the unfairness of it all, obviously. So I'd gone to a grief retreat a couple years after he died. And one thing that one of the presenters said was, which kind of made me start to think, was anger is usually masking a different emotion. And for grievers, it's usually the grief. They don't want to feel the grief. So anger makes sense to me. I can get angry with the best of them, right? Like I understand that. I don't understand grief. I don't know how to feel this. But once I heard that from this person at this retreat, I was like, okay, maybe I just have to allow myself to be sad, which I didn't want to do. It was like foreign to me to be sad, because prior to Mark's diagnosis, even I was the kind of person that just I thought I made things happen. There's a problem, I can fix it. We get through this. It's not I mean, we can deal with it. I couldn't fix that. And so that was like a really eye-opening thing for me. Oh, I don't control the universe. I thought I did, but I don't. So now I have to figure out, how do I handle this sadness when my whole life was spent just fixing things and kind of making them work to my advantage. And then this one didn't. So that was pretty eye-opening for me of, how do I get through this? So I just started literally sitting with my emotions, and I would sit on my hands and, my chair in my living room, and just make myself sit there and look at the clock or look out the window or whatever, and cry and do whatever I had to do, but not get up from the chair for maybe 5 minutes. Maybe we extended it to 10 minutes, whatever the case was. It's like, I have to, because of course I'm modeling for my kids too. And I don't want them to grow up to be angry adults because they had an angry mom, all the time. And so we started talking a little bit more about the grief, and my kids, again, were boys. So it was very difficult to get to their grief center. I'm not sure we ever did. And then my older son went through a really bad time in high school. So we had that on top of everything else to deal with, anyway. So it was difficult, but I had to really make a concerted effort to let the sadness come through. That's not an easy thing to do.
Yeah. I mean, just like talking about death, we're not good about talking about sadness.
No, not at all.
We're so quick to be like, you're okay. You're going to be okay.
Yes.
Or, fix it. We got to fix it. So yeah, I mean, you're not alone in that.
No, definitely not. But there has to be a better way. And because we're talking about it more now than we ever have, obviously people can listen to podcasts like yours and others, and read books and stories and stuff too, that just gives them permission to do that. Where, I didn't feel like I had that. But I was carrying so much and, juggling so many balls,
right,
that because he was an only child. So I had his parents. They were wonderful people. But of course, not dealing with them, but they are a part of the picture over here on the side, who, having lost their only child. And we were close, and we're still close. And so I'm actually their beneficiary and all their estate plan documents because I took them to the estate attorney.
Yeah.
Let's get your stuff done, you guys. I'm not making decisions for you.
Yep.
You got to make your own decisions. So we did all that. And, but there's still that, it's a different kind of grief. Obviously, I'm grieving a husband. She's grieving a son and he's grieving a son. Different kinds of grief. The boys are grieving their dad. I don't know what it's like to lose a dad at 10 and 8.
Yeah.
I don't. I know what it's like to lose a husband. I don't know what it's like to lose a child. So we all had our different kinds of grief, and you really can't understand the other because you aren't going through it.
Yeah.
I think you may have answered this question just a moment ago, but hindsight is always 2020, right? Is there anything that you wished maybe you could have done or would have done that might have better prepared you from an emotional or mental sort of state of mind that could have helped you in those first few years? I mean, we talked a little bit about how talking about death sometimes kind of gets you in the mindset and maybe make it more accepting. Is there anything else that in hindsight, maybe you think back that you could have or should have done?
I should have gotten into therapy sooner than I did, for sure. It was probably for at least 4 to 5 years, but I got into therapy. Let's see, that would have been 2013, 14. Yeah. So I went into therapy because my older son was having trouble in school. So I went to therapy under that premise of helping, figure out what he was going through.
Yep. I've done that.
Yeah. Little did I know we had a whole lot to uncover over here. So I should have gotten myself into therapy sooner. I just didn't think I needed it. Or who's going to understand me? I'm not going to talk to somebody who's never been through, unless you're a widow and a therapist and are raising kids that are, teenagers and are running your husband's business. I don't want to talk to you because you don't know what I'm going through. So I avoided it because I obviously wanted to avoid those heavy, deep feelings too. But I should have done that sooner. Definitely.
Because you do seem like, you said so yourself, you're the fixer, you are, the one who gets everything done. Did you have a difficult time letting anybody help you?
Oh, for sure. I don't know who I was talking to the other day. I think it was on LinkedIn, but I said my mental issues in the beginning were from lack of delegation. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I don't, because to me, 9 times out of 10, it's just easier to do it myself, which is not good, but it kind of is easier. So I was not good at doing that. I took on all of it. So yeah, if I would have delegated a little bit more, and now I, counsel other widows and I'm like, let people help you. Don't do what I did, because it's just not good.
Yeah. I love to tell people, know your team.
Yeah.
Know your team. And if you are in a position of having a diagnosis beforehand.
Yeah.
I really like the idea. And this is one thing I was really grateful that I did is I had a person who was sort of like the buffer, who was the person who answered the door or answered the phone. I just said, if you need information, this is who you talk to.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
If you want to make me dinner, if you're like, I don't know what you can do for me. Don't ask me what you can do for me.
Right.
I haven't the slightest idea.
Right.
So she was the one who organized meals or organized if someone wanted to come clean or whatever. I'm telling you, that was 90% of my healing. I think that's
amazing, really, though. And what a great idea to throw out there for people. Yeah. Again, you have permission to have a person to help you. Yeah.
It made all the difference. It really did. And I think being the kind of person who will be on somebody else's team makes it easier to let somebody else be on your team.
Yeah. That's huge.
So yeah,
you mentioned that, you counsel other widows right now, and I want to give you a chance to talk about that, but I just have one more sort of area I just want to explore a little bit. And so time has gone on. It's been 11 years. You have since remarried, and you have shared that story. And the part that I'm particularly interested in is you had mentioned that Mark had encouraged you to explore a new relationship after he was gone. So tell me about that. At what point did he share that with you, and how did you feel about that in that moment?
Well, after diagnosis, again, how somebody with a terminal illness can act as positively or upbeat as my husband did is beyond me. I'm not so sure I would have been so nice in the same situation if I was told I was going to die. I'm just going to be honest with you. I would not have been as nice as he was about it. And I'm not saying he didn't have his moments in private, doing his own thing. And we had our own moments together too. So it was not all peaches and cream all the time, obviously. But he knew he was going to die. And so he wrote letters to his children, to me, to his best friend, to his parents. We read the letter that he wrote at his funeral. So he wrote a goodbye letter that we read at his funeral. But after he knew, that things were not going to turn around in his favor, because of course he thought he'd be the 1%, that was going to beat it. If you don't have hope, you don't have anything. So right. God love everybody that has the hope that could be them. But he said, you're 44 years old. You can't go through your life alone. So, I want you to date, whatever. And I'm like, well, that's easy for you to say, like not even thinking that's, going to happen. But he was very specific about it. So I did write a story about it. It was published in Chicken Soup for the Soul, The Miracle of Love. And it was just really about how he gave me permission, okay, which was nice. And everybody, again, you're so lucky, Kim. You're so lucky that your husband gave you permission, but it wasn't his permission that I needed to move forward with that. It was my own. Mm-hmm. So getting to that point was difficult. I knew what he said and what he wanted, but it wasn't about what he wanted. He's not here anymore.
Right.
It's about what I want or what I need at this point. And that was difficult for me to come to terms with. Obviously I did, but that's what I think was the key. It has to be it has to be my own permission that I give to myself.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wanted to ask about that just because I think that, for a normal, healthy couple, I think most couples at some point probably have that conversation about, if something happened to me, would you want me to remarry? Or
yeah.
I want you to remarry. And there can be some comfort in that if you get the answer that you want.
Right.
But what if they don't answer the way you want?
Right.
And so that can be a really hard conversation. And I'm not sure that there's really a right way to have it. But I do think that it is something in terms of just thinking about, if what if happens to you and your family, what is that scenario? How do you play that out in your mind? And even though it's a hard conversation to have, our advice is to still have it because
even if you do, like you said, you could get the answer you don't want, you could get the answer that you want, like I got, and then still have difficulty going forward with it. But the thing is, it's like I spent the first couple of years in this constant state of what would Mark do? What would Mark do? Kids are going off the rails, something happened here, what would he do? And I had to come to the point of like, no, Kim, like you don't have to abdicate your responsibility here. Like you can make these decisions. You're capable. You're a good mom. You're doing well by your children. I got tired of having discussions with a ghost about what he would do if he was here. Yeah. He's not here.
Yeah.
So I have to make these decisions myself. So I love that people can find that comfort and maybe, having those conversations. But at the end of the day, it's all about you, babe. I mean, you got to do what's best for you and for your family if you're raising one without permission from anybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important too, if you are going to have those conversations, to just don't promise anything.
No.
Don't promise that I will date or I will not date. You cannot make your person, don't promise anything to your person.
No.
You have no idea
well, you don't. And after, things change. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Things change. So my kids played piano when they were younger. My husband took them to piano lessons. That was their thing. I don't want to take kids to piano lessons. So when he wanted to start that, I'm like, that's on you. Well, after he got sick, I had to take them, which I hated doing, but I did it. And then when he died, I'm like, I got to keep taking them. They got to keep practicing. It was hell. Like the biggest stress for me at that point was piano lessons. It was like, this is ridiculous, but I kept doing it because that's what I was supposed to do.
Okay, I'm a piano player, so I am laughing my head off.
It was hell. So at one point when my oldest was 13 and he started having problems, we're leaving piano. And he literally said to me, how many more years do I have to play piano for my dead dad? And I said, you don't. We're done today, officially. Oh, man. Why am I doing this? Why is he doing? I have no idea. So I had to be, that was one of the things that I was carrying guilt around. He wanted them to play piano. That's great. But considering all the things we have going on, the way our lives were uprooted, they did end up playing. Nicholas, both my kids had piano for 10 years. I think we're good.
Yeah.
If they want to pick it up again at some point, they can. But this was like way too much for me. I'm like, you're officially done. We do not have to keep doing this. So to your point, don't promise anything. It's things change, situations change, circumstances change, relationships change. We can't be held to that.
Yeah. I think too, like when one partner dies and the other partner has to do all the things and, kids are going to be like, you don't make peanut butter sandwiches the way she or he did.
Right.
You have to at some point just be like, well, this is how it is.
This is how it is.
And you have to give up like you said, what would he or she do? What would they do?
Yeah.
Like, no, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
And you don't have to have Christmas like we did it before. And you don't have to do anything that isn't of value to you.
No, that's exactly right.
And everybody will survive.
They will survive. We survived. We didn't have Christmas the same way. The first year we tried it and I almost had a nervous breakdown. Why am I going to do this again? I don't know. So, a couple years after that, I had to get, I had bunion surgery, and I had bunion surgery scheduled for over Christmas break because I didn't want to put up the Christmas tree.
Corey, are you relating to this at all?
100%.
100%. So let's get the bunion surgery done. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. I can't put up the tree. Oh, sorry. I can't help you with the, whatever, what do you call the ornaments? I can't do it. Sorry, I had surgery. Whatever it takes, man. I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I think in terms of sort of that mental, emotional preparation, I think, Katie's suggestion is sort of spot on. That the best advice when you talk about what you want for the other is to suggest that you do what you feel is best when you feel it's best.
Absolutely.
Don't I don't want to commit you to doing anything or not doing anything. So I think that's very sage advice. So our time is running short. I want to give you a chance to talk a little bit about what you're doing now with the widowhood world and how you support widows. And if there are some widows that are listening that need some support, or maybe they know of someone that could use some support, how do they reach out to you?
Well, I have a website called Widow 411. So I started this a couple years after Mark died. I actually bought the domain the year he died. I had no idea what I was going to do with it. Just kind of came to me and I was like, Widow 411, okay, that's information. Maybe someday I'll do something with this. But when I was going through all the paperwork, after he died, again, I had all my estate planning done. I knew our finances. I knew our bank accounts. I knew all that. And it was still extremely difficult for me to get through those account changes and all of that jazz. So the whole time I'm taking notes and thinking I have to help other widows at some point do this because I know what I'm doing and it's extremely difficult. If you don't know what you're doing, you don't know where to start, you don't know how to begin. I can't even imagine trying to get through that mound of, after death paperwork. It's insane. So I just took a bunch of notes for that. So I started off with Widow 411, just pretty much being a website I write blog posts about things that I was going through. And I'm saying I'm helping other widows, but really I'm helping myself because it's what I'm actually dealing with at the time. So I try to be open and honest about it because it's not the kind of place where it's like, well, just do this and then this will happen and just be grateful. And then everything will fall in your lap. And it's like, no, this sucks. And you can say it sucks. And we're just going to call a spade a spade. So I started off with that. And then about 2020, so this was 6 years after Mark died, I published or put out a course on how to help widows through those after death tasks, the business side of death. So it's called the Ultimate Survival Guide for Widows. It really is like a soup to nuts of, not chronologically because everybody has different circumstances, but kind of all the things you'd have to do that first year. It doesn't go into probate. I'm not an attorney, so I can't, talk about that. But account management, figuring out where your income and expenses are. What do you do about taxes and insurance? High level. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. I'm not a tax, person, but I had to deal with all this stuff. So I was like, I'm going to help widows go through this as much as I can. You can pick and choose what applies to you, but I've got templates and worksheets and checklists and what to say to the credit bureau and all that kind of stuff. So that was like cathartic for me because I had such a hard time with that. I'm like, I really need to help other people do that too. So I have products for widows to help with the beginning of like the business side of death. I've got self-care products. We've got presentations like the summit that you guys were on that helps people through the holidays or through finding their purpose. And then I've got another course that is kind of for after I'm going to say maybe between 3 and 5 years, when you've gotten past that initial shock and you're starting to deal with your feelings and you think there's something more, and there is, then we really get into the nitty gritty of how your thoughts create your reality and how you can really change your own world around by deciding that you can be happy again if that's what you want, but it's up to you to do that. So there's a whole course on that too. So it's just really resources for widows. I share a lot of resources from other widows because there's a bunch of us out there doing this now, helping people. So that's pretty much what I do. That's Widow 411.
Nice. Well, thank you for doing that. And thank you again for taking the time to be with us today and to share your story and to share, some of the wins and the losses, the hard parts of being prepared and then executing that level of preparation. And we hope that what you have shared today will be helpful to those who are in the midst of their planning process and getting ready for when that time will come, because it's not if, it's when.
It's when. I appreciate you guys having me on too and doing what you do, because it's super important. The more people hear this, the more they start making, better financial plans and decisions. So thank you.
Come to us first and then come to you later.
Yeah, exactly. There you go. There's an order to these things. Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, Kim. And thanks everybody for listening, and we'll catch you on the next session.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, Kim.
Thank you.